Thank you. I'll try to be brief because I know that we're running a little bit behind on time. But if you think about the presentations that have been given today, many of the presentations have documented human rights abuses. And actually what's interesting and in some ways tragic is that these human rights abuses that we're describing have actually been justified and celebrated in the Egyptian media. If you look at August 14th, I just finished a fairly comprehensive analysis of Egyptian news coverage of the August 14th massacre. And I can only describe the tone as celebratory. The military and the security forces were praised, and the Egyptian people were congratulated on the dispersals of the protests. So, how is it that a large population like Egypt, and to be certain, Egypt is a split society right now. That's what the opinion polling data suggests. Okay, it's a deeply split society. But there are a lot of people that support Sisi and support the military government. There's no denying that. Okay, they do have support. How is it that so many people can come to support, justify, and even celebrate what any fair analysis would conclude is mass repression? I think media play a key role, and I've been very interested in examining the role of Egyptian media in the lead up to the June 30th protests, and then also in the aftermath of the military coup. And I just want to briefly set the context for you. There's been a lot of research done, academic research, about the Egyptian news system. And the research suggests that there is a crisis of professionalism in the Egyptian news system. There is a lack of professionalism. If you look at all of the standard measures, education, training, they're very poor quality. If you look at journalistic ideology, notions of objectivity, balance, fairness, detachment, these things are largely absent. One of the professors from the AUC, a retired professor from the American University in Cairo, where I worked up until January, he did some research and did some interviews with journalists there, and they told him that they perceived themselves as activists, not as watchdogs. That's very, very dangerous in a politicized environment where Egypt needs debate. In research that I did last summer in Egypt, I also carried out some interviews with journalists at privately owned newspapers. And those journalists told me and my research team that they intentionally biased news reports to make the Muslim Brotherhood and President Morsi look bad. And they said that the editors at their newspapers taught them how to basically suppress anything that might appear to be good news about the economy or the government or anything else, and how to make Morsi look bad by highlighting and exaggerating anything that was negative. And to be certain, and I want to be clear about this, I think in my analysis, I think President Morsi made some mistakes, and I think some of them were fairly serious mistakes. So there was grounds to criticize him, but when it came time to be critical, the criticisms were grossly exaggerated. And what I've argued in my research is that a series of myths were propagated by the Egyptian media system about President Morsi and about the Muslim Brotherhood. I'd like to just give some examples of kind of some sub-discourses right now, and then talk about some more serious myths. If you look at news coverage during the Morsi period, again, this is that 1 year period in which Dr. Mohamad Morsi was president of Egypt, we have news stories, and I'm not talking about individual reports, I'm talking about stories. These are ongoing stories in serious, credible news outlets about Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood selling the Suez Canal. We had news stories about Morsi and the Brotherhood selling the pyramids. We had news stories about the Muslim Brotherhood seeking to destroy the pyramids. We had news stories about the Islamists, including the Muslim Brotherhood, seeking to make lower the marriage age to 9 years old. These are serious news reports. By the way, in case you were wondering, all of the examples that I've mentioned so far, and I've done research on this, they're all baseless. They have no basis. But people took these things very seriously. In fact, I won't mention the university, but I was at a meeting, a high-level meeting at a university in Egypt, and professors were sitting around talking about the disaster of 9-year-old girls getting married. And so this was taken quite seriously. They said, we have to do something to stop this. There were news stories about President Morsi's son being paid 30,000 Egyptian pounds per month. There were news stories about Morsi appointing 12,000 Muslim Brotherhood members to positions in the government. News stories about Morsi being an agent of Israel, and so on and so forth. These were serious news stories. They were ongoing in the press, and I believe, and I've argued, that they contributed to the public anger that we saw in the streets on June 30th. The most serious myths, I think there were several, but I think the most serious myths were two, about Morsi and about the Muslim Brotherhood. The first myth was that Morsi and the Brotherhood were seeking to brotherhoodize Egypt. They were, in Arabic it was called Ikhwanat al-Dawla, the brotherhoodization of the state. This story really took on a life of its own. If you go back to that 12-month period and look at the news stories, you find both in the print journalism and also the broadcast journalism, this is what we see. The Brotherhood was taking over the military, they were taking over the judiciary, they were taking over the police. Remember, a year ago, the news stories were saying that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. That Mohamad Ibrahim, the Wazir al-Dakhiliya, the Minister of Interior, was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The people that carried out the coup were being accused of being, really actually the Brotherhood, Morsi was being accused of appointing secret Brotherhood members to these positions. The media was being brotherhoodized. The government was being brotherhoodized. I tried to challenge some people on this assumption because I don't think that the evidence really supports this conclusion, which is why I call it a myth. And so I was in a discussion with an academic in Egypt, and I said, what's the problem? You know, why are you motivated to go out into the streets on June 30th? This is prior to June 30th. And he said, he listed that myth. He said, because Morsi is brotherhoodizing Egypt. And I said, okay, well, what's your evidence? I'd like to hear your evidence for that position. And he said, and then he went through the kind of the litany, and I basically responded to him. And finally he said, well, he's brotherhoodizing the government. And I said, well, only about 30% of the ministers and governors are from the Brotherhood, right? Which is hardly an absurd number for the group that won 5 straight elections and really didn't have anything to work with because, and this is an important point, there was a camp inside the liberal opposition to the Brotherhood that systematically rejected participation in government. And this is simply a fact. It goes back to June of 2012 when Morsi was elected, before he was elected president. Oh God, 2 minutes. That's not good. Are you sure there's not a zero? So I said only 30% are Brotherhood figures. And he said he had to backtrack because I think he believed me. He could sense that I'd actually done research on this. And he said, no, that's not the problem. The problem is that the 4 key ministries have been brotherhoodized. And I said, what are the 4 key ministries? And he listed them. And I said, well, actually 3 of the 4 have non-Brotherhood figures holding those posts. And he said, yes, that's the problem. It's that one ministry that has the brotherhoodized. This is a serious conversation. I'm not making it up. This is with an academic in Egypt. I won't mention his name or which university he works for. The other major myth, and again, I say this as somebody who, I think President Morsi could have done a lot of things better. I actually believe that he could have averted this crisis. Okay? But There was another myth, which was that he was completely and utterly incompetent, that he had no idea what he was doing, and that the country was being ruined. This is arguably the most prominent narrative that we find in that 12-month period. He was ruining the economy. Everything he touched just broke. It was called the Nas, the curse of Egypt. Morsi was called the curse of Egypt, right? If you go through and you look at the empirical facts, what you find is a flawed president who did some things well. He actually did some things well. He made some mistakes. Some of the mistakes I would characterize as fairly serious, but some of them were actually mistakes that anyone probably would have made under the circumstances, because the conditions were so difficult in Egypt, right? And this is why Professor Richard Falk of Princeton says the incompetence thesis is deeply problematic because the conditions were so difficult. I don't have time to unpack that. I wish I did. But if you look at, just really briefly, the last thing I'll say is post July 3rd, the media coverage in Egypt has actually gotten significantly worse. It's actually gotten worse. So the Brotherhood on July 3rd became a treasonous group. They became a terrorist group. And the analysis that I've done, I watched 15 hours of news coverage, prominent news coverage, July 3rd, July 26th, and August 14th. The Brotherhood was being called a terrorist group on July 3rd. They were being called treasonous, khawana, on July 3rd, right? They were being described as disloyal to Egypt. They didn't respect Egypt's national borders. This is where you get people really justifying the mass repression. Well, they're not really Egyptians. They don't really have loyalty to our national border. The Brotherhood has been blamed for all of the violence that has occurred in the last several months. There's no denying that there have been bombings. There have been terrorist attacks in Egypt. There were churches attacked. But there's not a single piece of evidence linking the Brotherhood to this violence. The Brotherhood has denounced the violence, in strong terms in fact. I've looked at the discourse. They've called the church attacks crimes against not only Christianity, but crimes against Islam. Okay? Other groups have claimed responsibility, as Joe Stork pointed out, for most of the violence, yet it's the Brotherhood that is blamed most of the time without even any investigation taking place. So, believe me, I had much more to share with you. 4 pages, I'm only through a page and a half, but maybe in the Q&A I'll have a chance to go into a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Well, we have a Q&A right now for you, Brother Dr. Mohamad Elmasry. And of course, you said there are many Egyptians, and these are our brothers and associates and fellow citizens who don't agree with the victory of the Morsi government, who support the military coup, and they are our people as well. And there are thousands and millions of them. We have a question on that side of the scale, and we talked about how 7,000 years of Egyptian history, finally you have a free and open election, but here's the question. How democratic was the Morsi regime? Our media did not present it as democratic. I mean, how are you going to respond to that?
Well, I like to look at democratic measures. The Brotherhood supported the 2012 Constitution. I don't think that was a perfect document. But did it provide a basic democratic framework? I would say absolutely it did. If you look at that document, you have, and remember this is something that the Brotherhood openly campaigned for, and they helped write. Term limits for the president, which is it doesn't sound like a big deal in America, but that is a big deal in Egypt and in the Arab region. Term limits for the president. Significantly reduced presidential powers. The Brotherhood advocated for a president that would not be as powerful. Just to give you one example, in the Mubarak days, Mubarak used to wield power through the emergency law. For 30 years, Mubarak put Egypt under a state of emergency. In the 2012 Constitution, in order for the president to declare a state of emergency, he had to get 2/3 approval from both the upper house of parliament and the lower house of parliament, and it could only be instituted for a period of 6 months, and it could only be renewed at a maximum of 1 time, only with public referendum, a national referendum. So those are very strict conditions. That's just one of many examples. I'll keep going. The Prime Minister in that 2012 document, that constitution, was actually, according to constitutional law scholars, more powerful than the president. So you have a balance of powers. Every Egyptian had the right to establish a political party. Every Egyptian had the right to join a political party. So you have political pluralism and competition. These are the things that I, as a political scientist or studying political scientist, these were the things that I was looking for. I didn't think it was a perfect document, but it provided the basic framework for democracy. As a media person, I was pleased to read in that document that every Egyptian had the right to own a newspaper without government approval. In the Mubarak days, you had to get approval from the government. In the 2012 Constitution, you only need to notify the government. So I would say that the Muslim Brotherhood, while flawed politicians, are democratic politicians.
Thank you. And while our government was deciding to call the coup something other than a coup, and deciding whether that military aid would continue to go, our friends in the royal family of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Kuwait all put their hands together for the Hamid, how much? 13 billion, 10 billion, whatever. While we were thinking about, should we give them the 1.3 billion? They said, take away the decimal point, make it 13 billion. They gave to the Sisi regime. So these are the kind of corrupt governments that our tax dollars go support over there, right? So we can keep our gas at under $3 or whatever. And look at our gas. When the price of the barrel of oil goes up like $1, you divide that by 40 gallons. That's only like 4 cents a gallon. Why it goes up 15, 20 cents every week if it's 4 cents? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of games being played right on us right here. We are supposed to be the beacon of democracy in the world. We need to slap a few people around here too. The name of the organization, Egyptians Abroad for Democracy Worldwide, has a Facebook page, and these speeches that you're hearing today, I believe they'll be on that site, because we're getting 3 requests since Dr. Mohamad Elmasry, and now we have 2 doctors from the UTC, not to mention the parliament member from Egypt. These are, I mean, how can I ask these people to speak for 7 minutes? Come on. We're going to be here till 11 o'clock tonight. But Jay Leno left, so it's okay.